I'm Stan Grant. Good to be with you. Joining me on the panel, lawyer and human rights champion Mariam Veiszadeh, Liberal member for Wentworth, Dave Sharma, foreign affairs expert from the United States Studies Centre, John Lee, Shadow Minister for Families and Social Services, Linda Burney, and Mayor of Canterbury, Bankstown, Khal Asfour. It's great to have all of you here.
Thank you.
So, here's what I understand of our policy with China at the moment. China, communist, bad guys. Captain Australia will join Captain America to save the world. I mean, I'll be very concerned if this is the limit of our understanding of our largest trading partner and our second largest economy in the world. And worse, we're jumping into an arms race because of it. I actually think ABC's China Tonight made more effort to understand China than DFAT. So why isn't DFAT investing the same level of attention and resources to building a comprehensive relationship with China than with the United States? How much of China we actually understand or know, given we and our allies have been wrong in the past about China?
Joey, thank you for those kind words about China Tonight. We're very proud of the show as well here at the ABC. I want to go to Chris Barry first of all on this. And Chris, China wasn't mentioned today by any of the leaders by name, but there's no doubt in your mind, is it, that that's exactly what we were talking about?
Look, I think the whole question is around the deterioration in our strategic circumstances on one hand and how we deal with a major rising power like China on the other. But to go to the point of Joey's question, if we're not using every element of our national power to try and avoid going to war instead of jaw, then we're making a very serious mistake. And that's what really worries me, that we sleepwalk now into the possibility of another war.
Yeah, can I just stay with you on that, Chris, though? Because, of course, there are two sides to this. And we know from China and from Xi Jinping, he has talked precisely about war. He talks about being able to build a military capable of winning such a war and has made threats to invade Taiwan to reunify it with the mainland.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, though, isn't it? To go back to where I started this about 6 years ago, you know, in the lead up to the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War, I did the reading in The Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark at Cambridge University, and Margaret Millen's book on the peace that ended, the war that ended the peace. And you know, what really strikes you is the similarity between the last great age of globalisation between 1895 and 1914 and the signs of conditions we're now going through. So we're seeing, you know, a courageous announcement by the Australian government today to go for nuclear propulsion in our submarine fleet. You've seen the last 2020 defence update announce that we're getting more and more concerned about how we're going to deal with the whole question of rising China. And you've seen now on the stage the Quad, as well as these new arrangements that were announced today. So, you know, I just hope that we don't lack the strategic imagination to think there's a different set of outcomes here. And that's why I go back to my point. I hope all the elements of our national power are being used to try and make sure we never do have to go to war.
Dave Sharma, you've talked up nuclear-powered submarines before. Why was this necessary? It is an extraordinary step, isn't it?
Look, it's certainly a big step for Australia's defence capabilities. We've never had it before. The main reason why...
Well, there's only 6 nations in the world that do have this capacity, and every single one of them have nuclear weapons and a nuclear power capacity as well. This is crossing a real threshold.
It's a big step, although I think South Korea is in the process of acquiring nuclear submarines, and they don't have nuclear weapons, they do have nuclear power. Look, the main reason is because of our strategic circumstances. The nature of our geography and where we need our submarines to operate means that when we were using diesel-powered submarines, it was suboptimal for the sorts of things we need a submarine to do. We need a submarine to be able to loiter at sea undetected for long periods. We need a submarine to be able to operate a long way from home. We need a submarine to be able to travel fast if need be. All of these things, a nuclear propulsed submarine does much better than a diesel-powered one. So I think this is a recognition that our circumstances are such that we need to acquire this capability. I just make the point here with our Air Force. We've always acquired the most capable aircraft of its generation. We're currently acquiring the Joint Strike Fighter. It's a 5th generation aircraft. It's the top of the line model. For some reason with submarines, we've never chosen to do that. We've always said we're going to have a conventionally powered one. I think all we're doing now is bringing our submarine capability in line with our other power projection capabilities.
But John Lee, there has been a dramatic shift. It wasn't that long ago we were signing a deal with France, and it wasn't for nuclear-powered submarines. We've increased our military spending. All of the leaders today talked about the threats in the Indo-Pacific. What does it tell us about the trajectory that we are on now and the potential, the real potential for conflict with China?
All this has happened, the increase in military spending by Australia, the focus of the United States on the Indo-Pacific and other countries like Japan, even the United Kingdom, that is all a response to what China is doing. If you look at the last 30 years, and if the Chinese leaders say this, you have to believe them, they've been preparing for war for the last 30 years. For the last 30 years, they've engaged in the most rapid rearming in peacetime in history. And it's not just about the capability. They've told us exactly what they want to achieve. It's not just Taiwan. They want a far greater presence in the East China Sea, and they want a dominance of the South China Sea. So what we're seeing, the announcement today, but the events for the last few years in terms of where Australia and other countries have gone. In national politics, every time a country takes these sorts of policies, there's always a response, and that is the response that we have. On the issue of conflict and war, I would say this, that we are sleeping our way towards a war if we do nothing about it. The only way to prevent a war is to deter, because China is advancing. And the only way to deter China is to convince China that it would be a collective disaster imposed on China should China provoke a war. Now, I know these are quite blunt and harsh words, but this is the reality of our regional situation. And I would say that there is a far greater chance of peace if we are in a position to make things extremely difficult for China should it decide on certain courses of action.
Linda Burney, Labor has given some conditional support to this. Interesting comments today from former Prime Minister Paul Keating, though, saying that this is basically selling out Australian sovereignty and saying that we should be looking at a more independent approach. Do you agree with him on this?
Labor's position, as you say, Stan, is conditional. And it goes to nuclear weapons, and it goes to the non-proliferation treaty, which Australia is a signatory to.
The nuclear non-proliferation treaty that we're signatories to says that we should take all steps to eradicate nuclear weapons. How does that fit with now developing nuclear-powered capacity submarines? Well,
it fits within the Labor platform, which we've been very careful about today. My understanding is that the submarine deal, and let's remember it's the third one, not the second one. There was Japan, and then there was France, and now America, is nuclear propulsion. So our agreement to the policy is very conditional. But let's remember, Stan, that this is not going to happen till 2040. And then there's 1 year for 3 years, as I understand. I'll be dead before this is rolled out, quite frankly.
I wouldn't be risking that so quickly.
And the other point that's really important, and I'm surprised there hasn't been more commentary on this, is that we've spent $90 billion already on the attack submarine deal, and who knows what the compensation is going to be.
Not quite. Just quickly, Dave. We have to move on to our next question. I think it's about 400 million.
Look, $90 billion was the cost of acquiring 12 and operating 12.
Which you told us you were still doing a month ago.
But I think the announcement today made clear that we're not going ahead with that.
How do you feel about government policies that lead to the establishment of a permanent underclass of unvaccinated people with fewer rights in this country?
Khal.
Well, look, to answer the question, it's concerning what's going to be happening in the next month, 2 months, the next foreseeable future with two classes of people, effectively. We're going to have a percentage of people that are unvaccinated and the majority of people that are vaccinated, and their consequences and their rights are going to be different than everyone else's. And my concern, and I've raised this a number of times, is how are my small business owners going to be able to police who can walk into their shops? They can't afford, they've been smashed enough with this COVID and the shutdown and the lockdowns. How are they going to police that? And when I raised it with the Premier, because my idea was that there needs to be some government clarity, guidance for the 33,000 small businesses in Canterbury, Bankstown, her answer was that they should call the police. I don't think that's good enough. I think we need more than that. I think they need some protections to make sure that they're able to deal with that, because they don't want their businesses suffering any more than they have to.
When we talk about two classes of society, we've heard this throughout, haven't we? Particularly with the restrictions and the way that restrictions are enforced. Tell us about how you've seen that from your community and what your community has seen when it looks at how other parts of Sydney may be living.
Well, we saw the pictures on the weekend of Bondi and Coogee in the eastern suburbs beaches, and, you know, I don't begrudge anyone that lives close to the beach to be able to go there, but when we are stuck at home and we didn't have any hours of recreation, it makes my community angry, frustrated. I mean, we're fatigued after 11, 12 weeks of lockdown now, not being able to go outside. It really does hurt, and it shows you a double standard in policing. People there weren't wearing masks, weren't social distancing. Yet when someone in my community attends a funeral yesterday, wearing a mask, social distancing, they get arrested and taken by police.
Because there were excess numbers?
Because there were more than 10 people at the funeral. Now, they were both breaching the health order. One gets arrested when they're grieving and the others get to sunbake. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Linda, it is difficult, isn't it, when you apply and there have to be benchmarks to these rules. You have to say, OK, it is X number of people or X number of hours that you can exercise or whatever it may be. Enforcing those things are so difficult, and of course people feel as if they're being victimised throughout this. In your own area that you represent, are you seeing also this two cities?
I am absolutely seeing two cities. The area that I represent, three of the local government areas out of 4 are actually those red zones. And what I'm hearing from people, and I've had a lot of interaction with individuals, including Khal over the last week or so, there is an absolute feeling of two cities. One where you see people going to the beach, the other where you've got helicopters flying over you with loudspeakers, and that's the reality. The other thing that I'm hearing very much in our area is people feel unappreciated. There's been no recognition of the enormous efforts, including from the Islamic community, to counteract COVID. And I actually think the Premier was absolutely tone deaf at the beginning of this to the multicultural nature of the area. And I hope, Stan, that politics doesn't come into it. I really do.
Linda and Khal, both of you have had to get permits, right, to even come here tonight to be part of this conversation?
Travel permits, yeah. I think they're called movement permits, aren't they? You've got to apply for them.
That's coming out of the lockdown areas, the LGAs are concerned. Yeah. Dave Sharma, you live near the beach. Is this what you're seeing, the type of things that Khal's talking about?
Well, obviously, I've got tremendous sympathy and respect for Khal and Linda and their communities and the resilience they've shown in going through this, and I can't pretend to know what it's been like in those LGAs and some of the lockdowns they've had to endure. And I'll be honest, I mean, in living conditions that, you know, they don't have access to a beach nearby. It's not within 5 kilometres of them. Some people are living in high-density houses. A number of them are essential workers who can't work from home. They're dealing with homeschooling as well. It's tough. Look, the lockdown's tough on everyone, and I think it's been especially tough on those 12 LGAs that Khal and Linda represent that have felt this more than others. Look, I hope we're not going to see an underclass emerge in society. I don't think we are. I think this is certainly putting a lot of pressure on communities, and understandably, people are angry and resentful and frustrated about what's going on. But I think, you know, we are on the way out of this. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and I hope at the end of this, I'm sure we'll all consider ourselves Sydney-siders.
Surely
and
the
Australians
question, Dave, is how do you put it back together at the end of the tunnel? And that's the real challenge that's going to lay ahead of people in this city.
We're going to stay with this. Our next question as well comes from Amar Singh.
As a community leader and a charity worker, I'm deeply offended and appalled by the ongoing lockdown at mainly migrant communities in the southwest and Western Sydney. My question is, are we hurting our nation's proud multiculturalism and harmony? What will we, the next generations, think? How we treated our own as second-class citizens? One side of Sydney is thrown to the ground for not wearing a mask, and the other side is let loose to enjoy life. We need to show solidarity within New South Wales. This just doesn't pass the pub test.
Mariam.
I think Amar is right, and I think there is this postcode privilege, right? And a lot of this existed well before COVID, and what we've seen happen during this pandemic is it's just being brought into sharp focus. So some of the issues that you brought up, Dave, and you know we talked about this idea of they are battling. There is an undergrad. I think there is two sort of societies being created here, and I'm not at all suggesting that this is easy to get right from a policy perspective. It's incredibly difficult. I acknowledge that, and I don't envy those who have to make these decisions. However, this roadmap out has to be an inclusive roadmap. It needs to take into account there are entrenched inequities across multiple communities, including the Indigenous community. And how do we ensure that we bring everyone on the journey so that by the end of this, the entrenched inequities that already existed, they're just going to be far worse, and how are we going to tackle it at that point?
Khal, how do we deal with that when we know that different parts of the city have different rates of COVID infection? And we know that in the higher rates, there is also a proportionate response to that. We saw in the northern beaches of Sydney last year at Christmas, they were locked down during Christmas when the rest of the city could move around. If, as Mariam says, you're going to move to a lockdown, an inclusive lockdown, how do you do that when we already see that parts of regional New South Wales that have come out of lockdown are back into lockdown because there's been another outbreak?
Yeah, look, it's been tough, and I admit that the Premier's got a tough job, but the reality is having a tale of two cities isn't one in, all in, isn't we're all in this together, which is what she's been preaching. We're seeing people in my community stigmatised now by other parts of Sydney, something that they can't get work, they're losing contracts because no one wants to hire a plumber or an electrician from my part of Sydney because they might have COVID. I mean, we have high case numbers because 80% of our workforce in the 12 local government areas are the essential workers that are servicing Greater Sydney. 80%, Stan.
So they're having to move around.
They're moving around and they're either catching the virus when they're at work or they're coming home and spreading it or vice versa. But the discrimination where we're mandating a vaccination for a tradie that lives in the local government area hotspot and not if they don't, and then they're working on the same site, they're working next to each other. But there's different rules for different people. And that really irks my community. It makes us angry that we're being treated this way. We had a curfew that the Premier, by her own admission, said doesn't work. And then she brings it in for half of Sydney or for 2.2 million people. It was arbitrary. It didn't work. We had helicopters flying overhead, waking people up. I mean, it's just not, it wasn't fair to begin with. And I'm glad that she's lifted that curfew. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have been here tonight.
We're glad it has been lifted. You can drive home in safety tonight.
Christina Keneally has been installed in a safe Labor seat, displacing a local candidate, a Vietnamese-Australian lawyer who has lived in the community and served that community. Why do all Australian political parties have a diversity problem? And what message does this send to young, talented people of colour who may now be turned off from joining party politics?
Mariam, does politics have a diversity problem?
Oh, hell yes, it does. Look, for me...
There's a bit of diversity here tonight in politics, I must say.
There is, but I'm not running for Parliament. So, look, the point I'd make on this... The point I'd make on this is that, first of all, as was noted by the questioner, the Labor Party doesn't have a monopoly on this issue of having diversity. You know, frankly, from a female perspective, you know, the Labor Party is doing far better than others. Noting, however, that there is a bit of a pecking order here when it comes to diversity. When it comes to culturally diverse women, there is an intersectional identity there, and time again, whether it's in Parliament, and stats are sobering in this regard, whether it's in Parliament, whether it's in the top echelons of Australian society, what we find is culturally diverse women, like me, you know, there's a proportionate underrepresentation. And it's the same issue in Fowler. We're talking about an electorate that is incredibly diverse, and this is just a missed opportunity. And frankly, there was, I think, another piece that came out about someone else sharing their experiences. This is a very common issue amongst culturally diverse women in particular, and we need to tackle it. Parliament has to be representative, and it's not like the way people see diversity is this idea of like a sprinkling of diversity, like the way that you'd perhaps put some salt on your chips. That's not what we need. We need critical mass.
Yes, I think it was Anne Ali who said diversity is more than wearing a sari or eating kung pao chicken.
Precisely.
But just to choose question as well, she said that Christina Keneally has been installed. She hasn't yet, Linda, but it does raise this issue of how can Christina Keneally, who does not come from there, represent Fowler better than a local Vietnamese woman who comes from that community?
I'll come to that, but can I just say that diversity is more than cultural heritage.
Of course.
Diversity is people with disability.
Exactly.
Diversity is gay people. Yep. Diversity is not just, you know, about your ethnic diversity.
Now, let's come to this. How does Christina Keneally better suit than a local Vietnamese woman who was looking to be installed in that seat?
Look, politics is contested. Sometimes you like the outcome, and sometimes you don't. I have known Christina Keneally for longer than anyone else in Canberra. 2003, we were both elected on the same day, and she is a talented, competent, very important part of the Labor Party.
But Linda, this is about a deal. She was in the Senate, she was being moved down the ticket. Let's find a convenient seat for someone who's been moved down the Senate ticket to keep her in the Parliament at someone else's expense. This is a deal.
Well, there's lots of deals in politics, Stan. And in relation to diversity, I'm an example of diversity in the Australian Labor Party. And how long did it take to get the first Aboriginal person woman elected to the House of Representatives? 157 years. I don't.
The issue, though, don't you think?
I don't. Yes, it is.
It's taken too long. We can't.
But diversity is something that the Labor Party gets, and it is right, Mariam. It takes a long time, but I can assure you that this has been a healthy discussion.
Khal, how do you feel as a Labor mayor?
Look, I understand that all political parties, Labor, Liberal, and all of them need to do better when we have people elected to Parliament that represent multicultural Australia, represent the communities full of people of different backgrounds. But necessarily, I mean, frankly, we're all Australian, and I think it's important that the people of Fowler have someone that's going to be able to...
Well, they'll make the final decision.
To fight for them, to make sure that their concerns, their aspirations...
But they're only going to get to choose the candidate that the party decides is the right candidate. They're not getting to make a decision on who else... It is called pre-selection, it is, but that's the choice they're going to get. The question here is, who is making that choice?
Then the party's making that choice at the end of the day. The party puts up the pre-selection candidates, and Christina will be a fantastic member for Fowler should she get elected. She'll be able to take the aspirations to Canberra to help those people and the concerns that they have. She was the Premier of New South Wales. She understands multicultural communities in New South Wales. She's a senator for New South Wales.
Although this isn't about Christina Keneally per se, there is a bigger issue at play here. And I appreciate this is a really tricky terrain for any political party, but there is an opportunity here to send a broader message around cultural diversity. About 4% of federal MPs are from a non-European background. Sorry, 4% in Parliament, but about 20% outside of Parliament. That's not proportionate representation. Time and time again, and Lee is a fantastic candidate. This is not about Christina Keneally's competence. Of course she's competent. This is about the broader message that this sends. You can't aspire to be what you can't see. And when we look at Parliament, there's incredible examples of diversity, absolutely. But when we look at Parliament, we look at the top echelons of Australian society, that representation is simply not there, and we can do better. And this is an opportunity for the Labor Party, and I wish they would take it.
Dave Sharma.
Look, I'm not going to get involved in Labor Party politics. Ultimately, that's between the Labor Party and the people for Fowler. But I completely signed up to the broader point here that the Parliament needs to look more like modern-day Australia, and it doesn't. Let's be honest. And, you know, we all have a duty as parties, but also as elected representatives and, you know, leaders of a sort to make sure that we encourage people to get into Parliament who don't fit the normal mould, that we mentor people from a diverse background in whatever way, and encourage them to get into public life.
But Julie was mentored. All of those things happened, but she can't even pass that initial hurdle. And this is where the policymakers come into play, and this is why we should have cultural diversity targets.
Well, John Lee, this panel tonight is a bit of a tick for diversity, I have to say. But just to get the final word from you on this, we can talk about diversity and we can talk about ticking boxes. There's also the question about whether you get the right people. Where do we draw the line in representation and diversity and also getting the best representation for people?
Well, I think you start by not reducing someone to one thing. Look, I'm ethnically Chinese Malaysian. I'm very proud I'm Chinese Malaysian. That's not all that I am. I would like to see more Chinese Malaysian people in Parliament, but I wouldn't vote for someone just because they were Chinese Malaysian. I would want to ask what else they want to do, how they think, what their temperament is, and so on, whether they make a good candidate. I don't know Tuli at all, so I have no idea what kind of candidate she is. But I would note that a lot of the commentary in the media has just focused on her ethnic background, and I think it needs to be about more than that.
Yeah.
Good point to finish on. Thank you all again for being part of this. That's all we have time for. Thanks to our panel, Mariam Veiszadeh, Dave Sharma, John Lee, Linda Burney and Khal Asfour. And thank you as well for all of your questions. Next week, we're live in Sydney with, this will be really good, a science spectacular with Nobel laureate Brian Schmidt, quantum physicist Michael Beachik, AI expert Toby Walsh, and wildlife scientist Vanessa Perrotta. I'm going to go away and really get myself read up about it. It's a chance to forget COVID for just a moment and to expand your mind. In the meantime, until then, stay safe. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.